As we talk about American victory at New Orleans, I want to remind you that after 4 nights of fighting and 4 nights of building the fortification, the British commander Pakenham finally made the decision that he was going to march on the American fortification. And General Jackson's forces at New Orleans are going to endure 3 separate assaults upon that fortification. And we'll just kind of list them: first assault, second assault, and third assault. So we'll talk about the first one. It's kind of interesting because it occurs on the morning of December 28th of 1814. The morning of December 28th, 1814. Now, British Commander Pakenham decided to try something before he actually assaulted the parapet or the fortification. What he did is he ordered the firing of Congreve rockets into the sky towards the fortification. So on the morning of December 28th of 1814, British Commander Pakenham orders the firing of Congreve rockets into the sky toward the fortification. Now, Luke, why would he do that? Yeah, why would he do that?
See if they run away.
Yeah, why would they run away?
They don't know what it is.
They don't know. That's exactly right. He figured they had never seen such a weapon, and he thought if he fired these Congreve rockets into the sky, since these bumpkins from Louisiana had never seen such a thing, it may frighten them into surrendering. Well, actually, the American reaction to these rockets is they thought they, quote, looked rather pretty, and they did not budge from the fortification. Now, if you knew anything about Andrew Jackson, you'll learn more about him. Even if they were scared of these Congreve rockets, I can assure you under Jackson's command, he wouldn't have left. That's just the way he is. But that was kind of the strategy to try to scare the Americans off by firing these Congreve rockets at them that they had not seen before. Well, when Pakenham realized that the firing of the Congreve rockets was not going to make any difference, he then ordered firing both cannons and his men firing their muskets at the fortification from a distance to see if he could cause damage to the parapet. So as a result of the American reaction that the Congreve rockets were rather pretty, the British fired their cannons and their muskets from a distance into the American fortification. And they did that for 3 hours. 3 hours of firing into that fortification to no avail. And so basically after firing at it for 3 hours with no positive results, British Commander Pakenham withdrew his men and cannon fire to try to come up with a different plan for the fortification. So his first attempt was actually kind of a weak attempt. Okay, fired the Congreve rockets, didn't scare them off, fired cannons from a distance, muskets from a distance, didn't do any good, decided to quit that assault and try to come up with a better plan. Well, the better plan is going to be the second assault. Now, before we talk about the second assault, you have to know that probably the best route for efficiency on the part of Pakenham would be to march his men straight into the fortification. He's thinking that might be a possibility. But why is he reluctant to do that, Danny?
Because you lose a lot of men.
Oh, absolutely. He can see that as a loss of tremendous amounts of men. Even though he's got them outnumbered more than 2 to 1, if he marches them straight into that fortification, he's going to suffer severe losses. And so he's trying to come up with a better plan. Will he eventually have to use the plan we just talked about? We'll see. So what he does on January 1st of 1815, a few days later, on January 1st of 1815, he brings in bigger cannons with more range and more power from British Navy ships that are docked nearby. So he goes out and gets bigger cannons, bigger naval cannons, that are going to have more distance and more power. And the strategy that Pakenham's going to use is he's going to fire upon the fortification, hoping to destroy the wall with these bigger cannons that are much more powerful. So when the cannons are ready and they're in place, on January 1st of 1815, Pakenham orders the bombardment of the American fortification with these much larger and more powerful cannons. Well, Jackson at this point decides to return fire with the American cannons. And the men that are running these American cannons are Jean Lafitte's pirates. They are given the job to fire these cannons back into the British camp, which is located where? On these sugar plantations. So, Pakenham orders the bigger naval cannons to fire upon the fortification, hoping to destroy it with the bigger cannons. In the meantime, Jackson orders Lafitte's pirates to begin cannon fire back at the British forces that are camped at the plantation. Well, this is a sugar plantation, so what the British did is there were lots of extra barrels of sugar on the plantation. So they lined those barrels of sugar up for what? Protection, as they're somewhat of a fortification to protect them from this American cannon fire. Well, the problem was, what were these cannonballs doing that were fired from the pirates? They were hitting these barrels of sugar, and what happened when they hit the barrel of sugar? Exploded, and the sugar went everywhere. Well, when they hit these British naval cannons, what happened to the sugar that poured all over the cannons? Melted, right? Got stressed. And what did it do to these naval cannons? Plugged up their firing mechanisms, and they wouldn't fire. Their breeches, etc. So Pakenham's doing this battle back and forth. These American cannons are hitting these sugar barrels, spraying sugar all over the place, including all over these naval cannons. And when the sugar is melting because of the heat of the cannons, they're gumming up the breeches and the firing mechanisms, and so Pakenham needs to stop this assault. So the second assault doesn't go very well either, does it? Results in some gummed up cannons that Pakenham cannot fire any longer, so he stops and needs to come up with a third strategy, or the third assault. And what's he forced to do, Riley? After the failed bombardment during the second assault, what decision does he make? To march his men at the fortification. Now I want to preface that by saying there's a difference between marching your men and then putting your men in attack mode. What's the difference? You're marching to get there, and then you order them to attack, then they start being offensive, right? Firing and fighting. So, after the failed bombardment during the second assault, Commander Pakenham makes the fateful decision to lead a direct march against the American fortification. And he does that on January 5th of 1850. January 5th of 1850. Well, can you imagine what Jackson's men are looking at? They're looking across this large field, and they're behind the fortification, 4,000 strong, and they're seeing 10,000 British redcoats marching right at them. What do you think their thought is? Oh my God, we might be in some trouble here. You know what I mean? So they're a little bit nervous. Well, this is kind of an interesting story, because what Commander Pakenham does is he orders his men to march. He has not ordered them to attack yet. In the meantime, he has sent several British soldiers ahead of everybody to try to put ladders where? At those moats at the base of the fortification, so when their men get there, they have a way to get over the fortification through the moat. So he's ordered a select number of British soldiers to go ahead of the pack and get ladders in that moat. That's not going to be an easy job, because do you think they're going to be fired upon? Oh, certainly. But he sent quite a few with ladders. And these men were supposed to put those ladders in so the British could scale the moat in front of the fortification to breach the parapet. Now, Commander Pakenham's given orders to his soldiers only to march, not attack yet. When he wants them to attack, how's he going to signal them to attack, do you think? Because he's not going to be able to yell. I mean, there's 10,000 of them. So what's the signal going to be when the soldiers know, hey, it's time to go from march to attack? What's he going to do? That's very good. Very good. Look, he's going to fire a Congreve rocket. And when he fires that rocket, that's the signal for his men to get into the attack mode. Okay, they're in range now, right? Well, as the British march comes into the range of Jackson's cannons, what do you think he does? he orders them to fire. Who's running the cannons? The French pirates. Now this time they don't have cannonballs in the breeches. What do they have?
Grape shot.
Grape shot, which is basically metal, shrapnel. They even used, by the way, doorknobs from homes in New Orleans in this grape shot. Can you imagine what it would feel like to get hit in the leg or the chest or whatever by a doorknob coming out of a cannon? That would be not good. It was like a shotgun effect, right? Instead of shooting a cannonball that may damage, kill, or injure 3 or 4 soldiers, this grape shot was getting 100 at a time. Okay? So again, as they march, waiting for the order to attack, Jackson orders the American cannons to be fired by the French pirates, but this time they're loaded with pieces of metal or grape shot rather than cannonballs. And the shrapnel that was fired at the oncoming redcoats caused major havoc, as each blast killed or wounded 100 soldiers instead of 2 or 3. Now, despite the carnage that Pakenham was watching, he continued his men to march. Now, the smoke is pretty thick by this time from the cannon fire, and Pakenham thinks that he's got the ladders in the moat. And so what does he do? Orders the Congreve rocket to be fired and puts his men in the attack mode. Even though he's not sure the ladder's in, he's pretty sure, but he can't tell because the smoke is so thick. So despite the fact that the ladders are not in the moats yet, and because the smoke was so thick, Pakenham ordered the Congreve rocket to be fired, and the British troops went into attack mode. Well, as the British troops get closer and closer and closer to the fortification, what's Jackson telling his sharpshooters, many of them at the wall, to do? Wait until they get closer. Wait, wait, wait. And as soon as Jackson feels like they're in range to make a difference, he orders the firing, and some of these British redcoats are actually shot at point-blank range as they're trying to get over the moat into the fortification. So, again, Jackson orders his sharpshooters that are placed behind the wall to wait until the very last minute to fire when they're definitely in range of their muskets, and the result was shooting at redcoats at sometimes point-blank range as they struggled to get across the moat and over the fortification. In less than an hour, British ranks break off. In less than an hour. What does it mean when I say British ranks break off? They go out of the attack mode into the retreat mode. Now the reason they did is because during this siege, British Commander Pakenham was shot first in the leg and then in the chest and was killed. And they had a leaderless army, right? And what happens to these leaderless armies, as we learned in the Revolutionary War? They fall, they get in disarray. And that's what happened to the British Army. Not only were they getting shot up pretty badly, they also had lost Pakenham and were basically leaderless. Okay? The junior officers did not know what to do. Well, like I said, in less than an hour, the battle is over. And as the smoke clears and Jackson's men are standing at the top of the fortification and looking towards that great big field, what are they seeing? In their words, a sea of red. What were they seeing? Redcoats, dead or wounded redcoats laying across the battlefield. And they refer to that sight as a sea of red. All in all, the estimation was that over 2,000 British soldiers were either killed, wounded, or captured in the fight for New Orleans. Over 2,000 British soldiers were either killed, wounded, or captured. Anybody want to guess what the American casualties were, killed, wounded, or captured? Obviously there was none captured, right, because they were behind the fortification. How many wounded or killed? Anybody want to guess? 24. 24. 24 were either killed or wounded. Now, although there is debate over who won the War of 1812, some historians kind of think it was like a stalemate, this victory by Jackson at New Orleans gave Americans the view that what? We had won the War of 1812, and Andrew Jackson became like an instantaneous hero. He became known as the second George Washington in many Americans' minds. And I'll explain that to you in a second. So General Jackson's victory keeps the British from gaining control of New Orleans, thus the Mississippi River. It also gives the American people the thought process that the Americans won the War of 1812. And it gave Jackson, in some people's mind, that he had become the second George Washington. What do I mean by he'd become the second George Washington? What did George Washington do? Well, that's very close. He achieved American independence from Great Britain, right? George Washington had achieved American independence from Great Britain. What had Andrew Jackson done? What? Confirmed it. Very close. Confirmed it. We had defeated the most powerful country in the world not once, but twice. Once under Washington, and in people's minds, one under Jackson. So Jackson became the second George Washington. Why? Because George Washington had achieved American independence from Great Britain. Andrew Jackson had confirmed it. All right. You know what we're going to watch now? The Battle of New Orleans. Then we'll talk about the Treaty of Ghent, which is the treaty that ended the war. Now, hey, I'll give you a quick precursor. Do you know that the Americans signed the Treaty of Ghent that ended the War of 1812 2 weeks before Jackson's victory in New Orleans? I want you to think about why that would be. Carter, while you're there, my man. Okay, this is very good. I want you to soak it in. I've told you about it, now I want you to see it.
War of 1812 has been going on now for almost 3 years, and it hasn't been going well for the United States at all. Culminating in a horribly humiliating invasion by the British of the Atlantic seacoast, the occupation of Washington, D.C., the national capital, and the burning of several of the federal buildings.
So the country was extremely unhappy. What they saw was, we're losing this war and we're losing our economy, and it is likely that this little experiment in democracy is not going to survive this conflict.
Andrew Jackson was promoted from Major General of the Tennessee Militia to the same position in the regular U.S. Army. When military leaders in Washington learned Britain might attempt a landing by sea near the city of New Orleans, Jackson and his militia were sent to prepare a defense. He was told an army of 2,000 well-trained soldiers would be waiting for him.
He doesn't have any kind of experience commanding large numbers of troops, but he's the only one they've got, and he's in the area, and so they say, New Orleans, this is your place to shine, this is your place to win or lose.
The British strategy was straightforward. If they controlled the port of New Orleans, they would have easy access to the Mississippi River. One army, moving north up the river, would join another moving south from Canada, splitting the country in half. With the Northeast already under British control, the capture of New Orleans was critical to their plan. No one understood this better than Jackson. He also knew he was about to take on 10,000 of the toughest troops in the world. These same soldiers had defeated Napoleon, led by the same officer who commanded them now, Major General Sir Edward Pakenham. Jackson desperately needed well-trained, organized, combat-tested troops, but what he had was quite different. A few hundred Creole volunteers from New Orleans, the same number of free men of color who escaped slavery in Haiti, a small band of friendly Choctaw Indians, and a couple of thousand backwoods militiamen from Kentucky, Mississippi, and Tennessee. Of Jackson's 4,000 troops, less than 10% were U.S. regulars. Jackson was outnumbered more than 2 to 1. But his most critical need was artillery. He cleverly sought help from an unlikely man, Jean Lafitte, a French pirate who had plundered hundreds of merchant ships off the shores of Louisiana and Texas, though Lafitte insisted, never an American vessel.
Lafitte offered not only his service as an intelligence officer, but he offered something that Jackson didn't have and could not resist: an almost endless store of gunpowder, flints for the muskets, cannonballs, things that Jackson didn't have and had no way to get.
Despite this new source of weaponry, the odds were stacked against the American mismatched collection of fighters. This didn't bother Jackson.
Jackson was utterly convinced he could win. I'm not sure exactly why he was convinced he could win. A lot of it had to do with he had to win, and therefore he got himself to believe he could win. And gradually he made his troops, this motley array constituted his army, believe that they could win too. And in military affairs, confidence, the expectation of victory, is more than half the battle.
On December 23, 1814, British troops came ashore south of New Orleans and encamped on sugar plantations at the edge of the Mississippi River. Jackson took the offensive. As night fell, he marshaled his ragtag army and headed directly for the British camp. Cannoneers opened fire from a ship on the Mississippi, sending the redcoats scrambling for cover.